All right, good. So, a couple things on the bolting tool, lab number 2. So when we install a bolt, we always put it in
Downward.
right downward. Why would that be?
Because it might fall out into the face.
If the nut comes off, where does the bolt go?
Somewhere else.
Nowhere.
Oh.
Unless you turn inverted, right? So that's just a safety feature. We go through a flange. Y'all notice that your bolts have a grip length, right? So
Yes.
everybody take your blue handbook out.
Blue handbook.
Turn to page 146.
146.
Where's your book, John? Yeah. All right. So page 146 also. Turn to page 61. Keep your thumb in.
We're not ready yet. Give us a second. We had a visitor.
Yeah, thank you. On page 146. See it says grip?
Yep.
That we call that the grip length. What does that look like on your bolt?
It's a flat like piece to be able to grab onto and without like.
No,
stripping.
that wouldn't grab on. Yes, go ahead, Avery.
Grip's the part that's like not the rigid part. It's the
So
smooth
it's
part.
like not threaded.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying. It's a-
Yeah, you're trying to say it, I know. So
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
threaded. So what is the advantage of having an area that's not threaded as we put it through a hole?
You're not gonna strip a bolt.
Yeah, you won't mess up your thread.
Yeah, you'll get a tighter fit here because if you look at your bolt, the grip length looks a little bit wider than the threads. Why is that?
So it fits.
Well, no, it's because the threads are not cut, they're rolled into that bolt. So it looks it's just an optical illusion. So they're virtually the same, but what happens is you get a tighter fit here. If you do this, if you have a grip length that's too short, you're gripping on the threads on the second flange, what will happen to that eventually?
Explode.
No.
Oh.
Strip,
What?
strip.
No, won't strip.
That's what it starts
But the
stripping.
plates will start moving.
Oh,
That second plate will start moving because the hole is not filled with the grip length, okay? So the grip length is supposed to go through the second flange, and we put a washer here so that we don't do what with the bolt, or the nut, when we put it on. You can't bottom the nut out on the grip length, okay? So conversely, what happens if we put in a bolt that's way too long for this flange here?
you'll have too much access to hole.
Actually, that's not what I'm looking for here. No, I'm sorry. Back that truck up here. You'll have to edit that out there, okay?
Yeah, I got you.
So if you put in on a nut here, okay, this is what you should see. You should see 3 threads sticking through. What happens if you see 8 to 10 threads?
Too long.
What's too long?
The bolt.
You are going to be hitting the grip length with the nut. And what do you do when that happens? A, you might have the wrong bolt and the wrong application, right? So check your parts manual. What else can you do?
Destroy the entire thing.
What's that?
You can move it.
You can use it, but what do you gotta do?
Move it.
Move it? Okay. What else can we do in this? If this is all we have, we put more washers on here.
Oh.
I was gonna
Okay.
say cut the bolt, but,
What's that?
I was gonna say cut the bolt, but okay.
Sometimes, it seems like whenever I go to get a bolt out of my drawer, the right one, they're never there.
Yes.
So I always gotta go up one size, and then I gotta add a couple washers, right? Sometimes the next drawer is also empty, right? It's whatever, sometimes you put in what you have. Not usually, but there's cases where you can do that. And just put a couple washers. How many washers are you allowed to have in there? 4 maximum washers, okay? We'll go over that later in hardware. So the other thing we need to do, we're trying to figure out the torque on these, that we're supposed to put on these bolts and nuts, right? So, where do we apply torque to a nut and bolt? What?
Bad.
We apply it to the nut end here. Why is that? If we apply it to the bolt here,
It would rip it off. And you would
No.
stop.
no, bolt's pretty strong.
Oh, okay. Moving on.
What else? When we torque it, because we're in a hole, we have friction. So as we turn that bolt to torque it, the friction will take up the torque and the nut will be loose. Okay? Does that make sense to anybody, everybody?
I don't know
Bobbleheads?
what torque is. So.
No? You understand that?
Well, kind of, but it's weird because when you're actually doing it, it would be weird to like turn the bottom.
But you need to turn the nut,
Well,
right?
yeah.
Sometimes you can't get to it, right? Then you gotta turn the bolt. But then what do you need to do? If we're turning the bolt, what do you need to do with the torque wrench? You need to increase the torque, correct? Okay? So, that is what we need to do. Now, we'll get to this in a little bit here. So, this is what here? What's that called? The diameter, correct. So, we need to measure, somebody read the paragraph that says diameter, the third one down.
Okay, I got it.
Thank you, Jen.
The AN number denotes the diameter of the shank in 1/16-inch increments. Example, 3 equals 3/16.
So, diameter in how much?
116.
1/16 of an inch,
Yeah.
okay? So, we have 6-inch rulers out there, correct? Well, right, what is a ruler's measured in inches? Quarter of an inch? Eighth of an inch? 16, 30 seconds, and 64ths, depending on which ruler you're using. What are we looking for in measuring the diameter? 16s, we just read it, right?
Oh, did we?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't understand.
So, well, read it out loud there.
I am all right.
Read it. Diameter.
Yeah, I'm reading it really quiet.
All right, 16ths of an inch, that's important to know. Okay, eventually you will be able to just pick up a piece of hardware and you will know what size it is.
That'll be
But it takes 5 years, 10 years, whatever, however long it takes you to get it figured out. So in the meantime, you have to be able to know how to get the measurement of a fastener, okay? All right, so if we are looking at 16ths of an inch, why that's there. So if your scale says 16 on here, what does that mean? It means each dash here is 1/16 of an inch. If it says if it says 64, what does that mean?
means it's really small.
Really small increments, right? Very hard to read, especially for older people like me.
You're not old.
And then, so if it's in 64ths, if this says 64, how many increments are 1/16?
Every
4 divided by
Every drop?
every 2?
Every 2, you think?
No, it'd be every 3. I bet.
How about every 4? Right? No. How much is that? Well, we'll get us, when we go out to the lab, I'll get a 6-inch ruler. What's that?
It's every 4.
It's every 4, okay. I just didn't trust my instincts.
64.
Okay. So you gotta know what the ruler is measuring in before you can look at the increments on that ruler and determine what a 64th is so you can measure your bolts, okay? Because there's like 4 different types of rulers out there, and don't ever use the thing that says mm on there, because that stands for what?
Millimeter.
Millimeters. We don't use millimeters in aviation, okay? All right, so
Milli, micro, nanometer.
how many people measured their bolts yesterday? Okay.
What?
What size did you get?
Mine was, the one I was in was a 10/32.
Was what?
A 10/32.
Okay, so what is that in sixteenths?
3/16.
Pardon?
I believe it was 3/16.
If you have 10 32, you need sixteenths, so the bottom number of the fraction divided by 2 is 16, right? So then the top one you can divide by 2, and that would be 5. Right. So 5/16 is the bolt that you have. What did you find for torque on 5/16 on page 61?
48 pounds.
It was what?
48
5/16? Or did you have a small one?
I had a small.
You had the smaller ones? Okay, the smaller ones out there are a 1/4 inch. So, 40 would be for a 3/16, you were correct. I mean, if you had 10/64, that conversion is correct, but, so make sure you know kind of what you're looking at when you measure your bolt, okay? Yes?
I want to know how to read the thing you just, I want to know I don't know how to do what you just said.
Okay, you have to do it out in the shop, okay? Once you have done it a couple times, you'll know what to do, okay? It's not hard, it's just new, okay? So, if we do, let's just take the 5/16 column here on the torques. What does,
Which column?
so we're doing, the nuts we're putting on are MS 20365-5. So when we have dash numbers, we just eliminate the 16ths. 5 is 5/16, okay? So this is what you're going to look up here under, it says, so it's the third column, nuts, MS 20365 and 310, 90,000 PSI in the bolt. So we're looking at compression on that bolt. So we want to keep that tight. So how much torque we put on that nut if we're using that third column for the nuts?
Is it the 200 one?
225?
Yeah.
Yep. 225. What's the lower number for?
I don't know.
Okay, so there's two different numbers there on 5/16. One's 5/16 24 and one's 5/16 18. Yes? See that on your columns there, or your chart? So the second number is the number of threads per inch. Okay? In aviation we have two types of threads, fine and coarse. Okay? The ones we have out here, they're all fine. Coarse nuts are usually, or coarse bolts are usually in the engine. Okay, so almost all of our fasteners on the airframe are fine threads.
Does that mean?
But how can you double check what you have?
By asking it.
How about counting the number of threads in 1 inch on the bolt? Or you can count a 1/2 inch, right, and then double it. So there are ways to figure this out without asking Mr. Williams for everything, right?
Debatable statement, but we'll go from there.
If something's finely threaded, does that mean it's got more?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So if it's a fine thread, there's more threads.
Mhm.
So they'll be close together, whereas the coarse threads are farther apart. So if you have, so in our 5/16, if you have 18 threads in 1 inch and you have 24 threads in 1 inch, what's the ratio?
18.
I'm just kidding. So we're looking at 225 inch-pounds, correct? On our column there for torque.
Yeah.
So what is the torque on a plain nut, which is the first column on 5/16 24?
100 to 140.
Okay. Why is that so much different?
Very different.
Because it's 40,000 PSI.
Right, but why would the torque be so much different?
It's 40,000 for different numbers and 90,000.
Right, so, we're using, so this is a plain nut here, right? And we're using a nut that looks like this. Correct? It's kind of crimped here. This is, we're using metal locking nuts, okay? Turbine engine, we don't use, there is a nylon locking nut. We'll get to that in hardware. But, so if we have a plain nut and we have a locking nut, what happens to the bolt as it goes through here?
A lot.
Right here, what
I would
happens?
assume it locks.
What's that?
I would assume it locks.
We lock. How do we lock it?
By putting a key in it and turning it.
By putting what?
A key in it, turning it.
No, we're putting friction on the
That's the
thread.
key.
Okay? So when we torque when we torque a nut, what we're doing is we're locking the threads together like this with tension, okay? Or friction that holds that nut on there. So on a little screw, you don't need a lot of friction, do you, to hold the nut on? Right, so we're holding the nuts on there with the threads, with the friction. So if we add friction with the locking nut, what do we have to do to the torque to get it to the same amount of friction on the threads as the plain nut?
You gotta increase.
We gotta increase it. By how much? What did it say here?
40,000.
We double it. 100 to 140 is 225, so on the low end it's double, right? So that's how much more friction, that's how much friction there is on a self-locking nut, okay? Kind of how we tell. Not scientific, but just mechanics speak, right? Okay, so that is what we're looking at outside on the lab today when we're bolting, okay? Any questions, or is everybody like totally confused?
No, I'm totally confused, guaranteed.
If you're totally confused, shake your head up and down.